What does it take to get a North London international human rights and open borders devotee to channel and access his inner far-right thug?
4.
I think we're all a bit more miffed that the government fell into Kier Starmer's lap, to be brutally honest.
3.
I've got your back. Yes, all the better to put a pickaxe between your shoulder blades, chaps.
2.
What's particularly galling is that Starmer tried so hard to reverse Brexit measures.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. Talk about changing your tune, co-pilot. From the moment he entered Parliament in 2015, Kier Starmer was determined to stop Brexit, maintaining freedom of movement between the UK and the European Union. After the Leave vote the following year, 2016, Starmer went into overdrive, spearheading parliamentary efforts to overturn the express will of the British electorate before it had even been implemented, and he and much of the Labour Party very nearly succeeded. But having been hammered by Nigel Farage's Reform Party in recent local elections, Starmer now says he wants to, quote, take back control, using the very campaigning phrase that delivered the Brexit vote he worked so hard to reverse. For years he's railed against those warning about the dangers of rapid immigration, but now our Prime Minister, in a desperate bid to outflank reform, says Britain risks becoming an island of strangers, echoing the famous strangers in our own land phrase, used more than 50 years ago by the left's favourite hate figure, Enoch Powell. Is it any wonder, Allison, the public doubts the sincerity of our frontline politicians? We've seen more police overreach in the case of Julian Fuchs, a 71-year-old from Gillingham, arrested and handcuffed in his home by 6 officers from Kent Police, the same force he served for 10 years as a volunteer. His crime, as you wrote in yesterday's Telegraph, was to post a lightly satirical response to a pro-Palestinian protester on Twitter, concerned as he was about rising anti-Semitism in the UK. It's a case stirring up strong emotions, and not least for you, co-pilot, given how Essex Police turned up on your doorstep last Remembrance Sunday. New figures show 63,000 fewer at work across the UK and 131,000 fewer job vacancies than in March last year, with Chancellor Rachel Reeves' job tax, the £25 billion annual rise in employer national insurance contributions now really starting to bite. And today, Allison, Thursday, you'll be at the Court of Appeal in London, sitting alongside Ray Connolly, the husband of Northampton mum Lucy, jailed for 31 months, again, for a post on social media, and we'll come to that. But let's start by discussing Labour's shape-shifting on immigration, Allison, on this, our 250th episode of Planet Normal.
Well, Kier Starmer appreciates that we're reaching this Planet Normal milestone, doesn't he, Halligan? He's giving us something to go off
We'll probably
on.
be arrested!
What does it take to get a North London international human rights and open borders devotee to channel and access his inner far-right thug?
Probably absolute fear that he's going to get unelected.
Well, as we're starting to record on Wednesday afternoon, we've just flashed up on the Telegraph website, Labour election wipeout. The results from the local elections last week, if mapped nationally, show Starmer's party facing an extinction level event. Now, you're going to be very, very upset about this, co-pilot, but one of the really sad bits of news is that Ed Miliband would lose his seat.
Oh, my God.
Oh, no. Doncaster. How could you do it? I was actually at a big event last night. I can't name names at the moment, but basically most of the famous journalists we know will be running as Reform Party candidates across the country. They're already salivating, Liam, over which particular Labour MP they're going to take out. So, yes, we did see this astonishing charlatan, our Prime Minister, gaslighting the British people, Basically, a strong speech given by a weak man. He says, the Tories lost control of our borders, let net migration soar to record levels, undercutting hard-working Brits. I won't stand for it, says the PM.
I've got your back.
Yes, I must restore controls and cut migration, and I'm delivering with tough new measures. British workers, I've got your back. Yes, all the better to put a pickaxe between your shoulder blades, chaps. So there's a lot to say, Liam, lot to kind of go through. I said in the Telegraph it was less convincing than Meg Ryan faking an orgasm in When Harry Met Sally. Nothing, as you say, in Keir Starmer's track record of speeches or electoral material, or indeed votes in Parliament, has ever indicated that he had any interest in protecting the British people from the adverse impact of mass immigration. And if we look at the detail, that the small print of this white paper on immigration, it is pretty thin gruel. Liam will cut net migration by 50,000. 50,000 is a rounding error. They're landing at about 600 a day. And Robert Jenrick, the Tory Justice Shadow Secretary, suggesting that migration, because they've overestimated the number of people departing, Liam, so it could reach 525,000 a year by 2028. So the planned reduction that Starmer is bigging himself up about is absolutely pitiful and will do almost nothing to ease the pressures on housing, on jobs, let alone protect our British culture.
And to put it in context, Allison, the then previously shocking record for net migration into the UK the year before the Brexit vote was 363,000.
Yeah.
So we're now way beyond that. And that, of course, is partly the Tories' fault as well.
Completely.
This is a cross-party thing. What's particularly galling is that Starmer tried so hard to reverse the Brexit measures. And he also, for years, him and his ilk have called out those of us who very carefully and very respectfully, while having a lot of time for the idea of immigration per se, celebrating our society and the contribution of immigrants over many years, we've been warning, haven't we, for a long time, it's about the pace. And once it gets too fast, you are tearing at the social fabric. And we have been pilloried and personally insulted for years for our trouble.
It's a speech, it's an announcement that has deliciously managed to offend everyone, something in it to annoy everyone. So the left, for whom immigration and open borders has become a bit of a religion, they're absolutely fuming that the Prime Minister is suddenly deciding that mass uncontrolled immigration might not be the top-notch idea he's been claiming. And then people like me on the right are saying, well, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. I mean, there's a lot of pointing the finger at him, comparing him, as you said at the top, Liam, to Enoch Powell, saying that without these new immigration rules, we risk becoming an island of strangers.
Labour speechwriters knew exactly what they were doing, right?
Completely.
Political nerds, we all have heard of the Rivers of Blood speech. Pretty much everyone in the UK, above a certain age has heard of the Rivers of Blood speech. It's absolutely notorious. And you do not have to be a professional observer of politics to know that along with that infamous phrase in that speech by the then Wolverhampton MP, Enoch Powell, strangers in our own land, strangers in our own streets. It's a very well-known political phrase. And the left knew they were doing that. They knew it was going to wind up the Corbynites, and they knew it was going to sort of try and signal to red wall voters who have gone with reform that maybe Labour are changing their tune. Completely deliberate.
Yes, absolutely. But it is a bit rich in every sense, isn't it? Because people in Britain, if you live in Bradford or Oldham or Rotherham or Leicester, all you have to do, Liam, is look out of your window to feel like a stranger in your own land. God, it's almost making me speechless, really, for him to suddenly pretend to be concerned that we're not a nation that walks forward together when, all of his recent announcements, from new definition of Islamophobia, wanting it to make it easier for refugees to apply for employment. All of these things. This white paper has got a bit of a tinkering with the length of time that foreign students can stay without getting a good job. There's this ban on the recruitment of overseas workers, not at all clear how or indeed if this would work. And the thing I particularly like is a toughening up of the English language requirements, which you just think, yeah, who's going to be testing for that? And you'll remember, Liam, as well, whenever a Labour government is under pressure, it's literally only with a gun to their temple that you get someone like Gordon Brown suddenly saying British jobs for British workers. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do, very much so.
They only play the patriotic, what's this going to do to the British population card when they are in deep, deep trouble.
This is the guy who signed endless letters, of course, protesting that the UK may actually deport people that have come here illegally and then committed all kinds of ghastly crimes.
Yes.
And then Starmer and his lawyer mates, many of whom are sucking at the teat of the public sector on legal aid, building themselves massive houses in the Dordogne off the back of taxpayers' money, stopping people being deported, who, I would put it to you, the vast, vast, vast majority of the country wants to be deported. And my concern here is that allowing immigration at this pace and refusing to deal with the existential crisis that this has now become, it really risks, it already has undermined deeply this country's natural tolerance, this country's natural decency and openness. He's threatening public consent for the whole idea that we may offer asylum, as we have throughout our history, to genuinely deserving cases.
Yes, absolutely. And if you look at recent figures, when we've given refuge to people fleeing Hong Kong, quite rightly welcoming Hong Kong Chinese and other people from Hong Kong, the warm welcome we showed to people coming from Ukraine, fleeing a horrible war, that's the kind of country we've always been, Liam, welcoming extraordinary generations of, Huguenots and Jews and people from the Caribbean and so on. But this is just something has snapped now. And it's very interesting if you read these articles pontificating about immigration. I suggest the real action is below the line in the comments because people are very, very, very angry. And I don't think we're very far away now from some very, very unfortunate, I don't want to predict civil unrest.
Of course.
But you do wonder how it's going to end. And you often talk here on Planet Normal, Liam, about shifting the Overton window. Well, what the astonishing victories, in fact, of Reform UK in the local election and the Runcorn by-election was to really give that Overton window a nudge, because we are seeing people now who would rather do anything than discuss immigration. We look back to Starmer when he was the immigration minister to Jeremy Corbyn in 2020 saying, we should celebrate this, blah, blah, huge contribution.
Starmer's whole pitch to become Labour leader, because he had to get the Corbynistas on board and all the Labour activists, was to be, ever more tolerant on immigration.
Yep.
Kemi Badenoch, to her credit, put a post of him saying exactly that out on social media. And just before you go on, Allison, we should, of course, we have to say this, I think, that she was absolutely right, the leader of the opposition at Prime Minister's Questions, to say how concerned she was and how disturbed she was at the cars being set on fire in North London outside of a home associated with the Prime Minister. I think we must say that. It's absolutely essential that we say that. And I thought that was Parliament at its best, just for a moment before they started hammering each other at Prime Minister's Questions again. There was this little moment of I don't agree with you, but I'm going to defend your right to say it. And I absolutely condemn any efforts to intimidate you or your family physically.
Yeah, and that was nicely judged. But, just looking, as you said, when he was trying to become Labour leader, if I'm elected leader, I will always defend migrants' rights, make the positive case for immigration. We must never accept the Tory or media narrative that often scapegoats and demonises immigrants. Problems of low pay, housing and public services are not caused by migrants. So I wonder it's the usual thing, isn't it? Oh, sort of economic mismanagement or something like that. So I would say that one of the key things that this is not a serious proposition, it's absolutely gaslighting the public, is Starmer has suggested no numbers, no cap at all.
Yvette Cooper won't let him.
No.
The Home Secretary won't let him. She's absolutely insisted that the Labour Party does not put a cap forward for tactical reasons, which means you have to wonder about their sincerity on this issue again.
As I said earlier, this promising 50,000 fewer work visas, it's absolutely meaningless, Liam, against this great tidal wave of people arriving. And some people who are sort of demographic experts actually suggest that some of these figures are huge underestimates of the number of people coming in. And we feel now, don't we, like a society creaking at the seams, people unable to access doctors and dentists and housing being out of reach. We've just seen that absolutely notorious thing of Serco, one of the companies that makes billions a year housing so-called asylum seekers, and they are undercutting normal British families trying to rent a property with these very lavish 5-year guaranteed rentals. By the way, Liam, I was very interested to see, it wasn't made much of, but you'll remember a couple of weeks ago, we had that story about police raiding an Iranian terror cell, which seemed to be targeting the Israeli embassy, although who knows what wickedness they were up to. Now, it has been revealed that, guess what? One of the Iranians arrested had been living in a migrant hotel.
Or had come over on a small boat, in other words.
Had come over on a small boat. What have we been saying, Liam? What have we been saying?
Yeah, and again, absolutely pilloried for suggesting it. It's not just the terrorist threat, it's also, the threat of safety, particularly of women. The Home Office now, of course, kicking and screaming, is being forced, we'll see if they do, to actually publish numbers which we know that they have, which show crime, particularly sexual crime, broken down by nationality.
Yes.
Of course, they are potentially incendiary numbers, but it's right that we see those numbers. So we know that the dangers that ordinary people are exposed to by this wave of undocumented people, some of whom are just trying to improve their lives for themselves and their families. But many of them come from cultures and societies that are just, by our standards that have been established and fought for over many years, literally fought and died for over many years, their standards in terms of misogyny are, way, way, way behind ours. And I don't mind using the word behind because they just are.
Yeah, well, we are finally, I think now, able to say this, and particularly as Starmer himself is voicing it. A couple of points. Although Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick are now very definitely saying the right kind of things, of course, the Tories come to the party with a terrible legacy, which you and I have often said may be unforgivable. I don't know. I think they'll have to do an awful lot to ever be trusted on immigration again, having in a single year let in 900,000. I mean, these are deafening numbers. Something I think is interesting, Liam, is that Labour ministers seem to be privately relying on a significant fall in the number of legal immigrants. And that will be due to measures brought in a bit of a panic by the then outgoing Tory Home Secretary, James Cleverly.
Indeed, in 2023,
You can bet that Downing Street is going to be absolutely delighted to take credit for that decrease.
Here's a thought for you, Allison, just before we move on, because we need to talk about Julian Fuchs, of course, and then also about Lucy Connolly in this, our 250th episode. Did I mention that? Ta-da! Here's a thought. So many people in political circles and media circles, they think, Boris is going to make a comeback. He's going to come and rescue the Tories. Now immigration is increasingly centre stage. I think this absolutely kills any chance he's ever going to come back because he is so associated. The numbers are just there with, it's literally called the Boris wave. Brexit happened, and then on Boris Johnson's watch, you had not a reining in of immigration to numbers that the British public en masse view as manageable, the tens of thousands as the Tories promised us in repeated general election manifestos, numbers more than doubled under Boris's watch after Brexit was implemented. And I personally think that is the kiss of death for him. I don't think he can ever come back, however charismatic he is, however many stunts he pulls, however many donors he manages to cajole into putting forward more money. I think this is absolutely the end of his political career, precisely because we are now having such an open conversation, finally, about immigration in this country. But moving swiftly on, Allison, on that blonde bombshell, if you like, let's talk about Julian Fuchs. How did you feel reading about this case? Again, you've written about this very powerfully, link in the show notes to this episode. You know, a gentleman in his 70s who served, as a volunteer for his local police force, being arrested by 6 Rozzers in his own home.
It's another of the farrago of thought crimes, isn't it, really? Of course, every time one happens, I have a flashback to my own visit. To be fair to Essex Police, they only sent 2 people round to my house, sent 6 round to Julian's, and examine his bookshelves. Examine his bookshelves,
I know,
right?
crikey.
Absolutely astonishing. So
We got Bob the Bard weighing in on that later,
we
haven't we?
have got Bob the Bard brilliantly weighing in on it.
He got arrested for having a Michael Portillo train video. Dusty old VHS.
So Julian became concerned, as many of us are, that his Jewish friends no longer felt safe in the UK since the 7th of October Hamas massacres. And his crime, heavily inverted commas there, crime, was to post this response to a pro-Palestine protester on Twitter who was complaining about Suella Braverman calling the protests hate marches. And what Julian wrote was, one step away from storming Heathrow looking for Jewish arrivals. Now, anyone who'd followed the news knew that that was a reference to an incident at a Russian airport where indeed Jewish travellers were horribly being hunted down. I suggest to you, Liam, you'd have to be very stupid or politically motivated to see Julian's tweet as in any way threatening. It was clearly a throwaway line, which, like my own tweet, did not come anywhere near the threshold for a criminal investigation. Yet there they are, barging into Mr. Folks's home, handcuffing him, ransacking his wife's underwear drawer, disgracefully sifting through the mementos the parents had of their daughter who died 15 years ago in a hit and run accident. So Julian is down at the police station, held for 8 hours, and he accepted a caution, bless him, because he was so scared that they might get him for something even worse and he wouldn't be allowed to travel to see his remaining daughter in Australia. Now, listen to this, Liam. This is a senior police officer who's been very helpful to me. And he said, "This is part of a sickening pattern where there is a total absence of common sense in decision-making. The police will nudge an accused person to accept a caution so they can log a conviction without the effort of a court case." And just coming back to that, ransacking the bookshelves, I think this was the thing that most people's jaws dropped at, was a woman police officer. They were searching this nice suburban house as if it was some kind of major drugs bust. And the WPC was muttering about what she saw on Julian's bookshelves, which contained a book by Douglas Murray, the wonderful author. I'm sure I've got several of Douglas's terrific books on my shelves, including his new one, and some copies of The Spectator.
Oh my God. That's it then. Lock him up.
Lock him up.
The oldest continuously published magazine in the English language. Hate crime.
She said these were very Brexity things. Now, God, unbelievable. Apart from the fact that, here she is, young woman police constable, disapproving of something that was voted for by 17.4 million British people. How impertinent, how inappropriate.
A vote that was won by a majority bigger than the population of Birmingham, our second biggest city.
Yeah. Well, we're obviously guilty of being very Brexity things. The question I have really was, how did that youngish police officer, who probably wouldn't really know who Douglas Murray was or what The Spectator was. Most people her age wouldn't have a clue. So I'm suggesting she had received some sort of training about far-right material in which mainstream conservative reading habits are now considered evidence of extremism.
I agree, Alison. It is incredibly disturbing. And also disturbing, of course, has been this Lucy Connolly case, which you've really thrown yourself into. You've been talking extensively to Ray Connolly, the partner of Lucy. Lucy's been in jail serving a 31-month sentence, a ridiculously long sentence, again for a social media post. And today, as Planet Normal goes out, Thursday, you're going to be sitting in the Court of Appeal. Why are you going there, Alison? Because I know you find these kind of public confrontations really quite stressful.
Well, I want to be there for Ray and I want to be there for Lucy. Lucy has had a chat with me from prison. This will make Planet Normal listeners laugh because, of course, me being an evil journalist who'd written about her sympathetically, and she got into trouble with prison staff for that. They told her off. They said, you've been talking to the Telegraph, naughty, naughty. We're not going to let you go home to see your daughter. So that's the way they treat people. She has, as Planet Normal listeners will know, Lucy has even been denied ROTL, right of temporary leave, to go home to be with her 12-year-old daughter and sick husband. But I got a call and I answered it. She's got a very good sense of humour, even though, God, what she's been through, Liam. I mean, you know, so she's very eloquent about what she's been through. She's not going to be in the Court of Appeal tomorrow in person. She'll be appearing by video link, and that's because she said, I can't face being handcuffed and being driven there in the prison van. And when she had her sentencing in the summer of last year, she was harangued. She had a horrible summing up from a judge who had paid no attention to any of the mitigating factors in Lucy's case, which were that Lucy and Ray lost their baby, 19-month-old Harry, to horrible medical negligence, and she has suffered PTSD ever since, easily triggered by the deaths of or suffering of small children. And that's what happened on the day of the Southport massacre. Lucy was extremely angry and upset about the murder by Axel Rudakabana of those three little girls. And she tweeted something really, it was horrible, Liam, let's face it, it was horrible. It was incendiary, literally incendiary, and burn them down, you know, what do I care? And she deleted it about 3.5 hours later because she knew that was a really wrong thing to do, totally out of character. This is a woman who absolutely adored by the parents and children of, you know, immigrant families, absolutely love Lucy and so on. It was a mistake. What a high price she has paid. Today, Thursday, when you're listening to this, is her 279th day in jail.
And let's talk a little bit about her family, because you have really got to know her family. You've got to know Ray. You went to visit Ray, of course, and you wrote about that in an extremely moving way, with a lot of other journalists disgracefully just ripping off your quotes without attribution. You do not do that in our profession, but they clearly did anyway, which I thought was ridiculous. That's not a small point. And of course, Lucy's daughter. Tell us a little bit about Lucy's daughter.
Well, I met her. She's like a mum. She's a fierce, fiery little girl. Well, not that little actually now. Age 12, coming up to puberty, giving her dad quite a lot of trouble, Liam, because you'll know, having had two daughters yourself, that's a very tricky age for girls, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she really needs her mummy. And she's been, you know, very difficult and stroppy with her dad, clearly very, very distressed. And this appeal, the family knows they've got this appeal coming today when you're listening to this, Planet Normal listeners. And Ray has been, her husband, just so nervous and trying to give Lucy confidence. Everyone's trying to give her confidence, but of course it's, you know, we just don't know. Very good barrister Adam King, who's going to argue that the judge should not have sentenced Lucy on the basis of the highest categorization on the sentencing guidelines, which was intention to incite serious violence. She absolutely had no intention of inciting serious violence, and also that very little account seemed to be given to the many mitigations in her case, having been a pillar of the community and a well-loved person. Can also mention that a well-known tabloid newspaper has been walking up and down Lucy Street, knocking on the doors, asking if Lucy had ever had any trouble or expressed any horrible sentiments about Muslims. They've been sent away with the flea in their ear, shall we say, Liam, because Lucy's got a lot of lovely friends. So just to fill Planet Normal listeners in, I'll be outside the Court of Appeal, the Free Speech Union, the amazing Free Speech Union, which is increasingly playing a role in defending the public against the police and against the excesses of what some might argue was a politicised judiciary. We all know, let's refer back to how we started. Sir Keir Starmer, now newly converted to the idea that mass immigration might pose some problems, was extremely cold and threatening to the men and women, many ordinary men and women who went out on the streets after the murder of the 3 little girls in Southport. And we've just had a report, Liam. He called them far-right thugs. He implied that it was coordinated, people were being bussed in. This report has just found there was no evidence of far-right thuggery or indeed far-right plotting. This was normal British people like Lucy, like Ray, who have been extremely kind and welcoming to people from all around the world, but who are worried, as Lucy said in her statement, about undocumented males arriving in great numbers on our shores and the threat that they may pose both to young women and to girls, little daughters like Lucy's own, or indeed in terms of the terrorist threat. So the Free Speech Union and me and Ray and several other people, we will be standing outside the Royal Courts of Justice today, Thursday, 9:30 a.m. Of course, you might not be able to get away, so please could you send us your prayers and good wishes. We really want her now. I think she's been punished enough. Some might say, lots of people have told me, magistrates, retired judges, Lucy shouldn't have been given a custodial sentence at all. So we will be out there from 9:30 a.m. with placards, just hoping that some mercy, some forgiveness, the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth from heaven on the earth below. Some mercy for Lucy Connolly. And finally, Liam, with some other people, with Dan Wootton of Outspoken and some other concerned people, we are setting up a crowdfunder for Lucy Connolly. You'll be able to find it in the show notes. Ray is a very proud man, but he's had to sell pretty much everything, including his car and almost everything in the house. And there are debt collectors involved. And Lucy obviously has been unable to work since she's been in jail since August. So things are pretty perilous for that family. And we're just setting an initial target of 20,000, which would give Lucy a bit of a breathing space when she gets out and a chance to spend some time with her daughter and Harley the dog and with Ray and just reintegrate into society. And I should say finally, Liam, because I've got to like Lucy a lot talking to her, she says, a person like me would never have met women like the women I've met in this jail. She says there is no attempt at rehabilitation. We are rats in a box. And when she gets out, she wants to use her experience to campaign for prison reform. So what a wonderful rebuttal that would be from a basically decent, not a racist person to actually use this horrible nightmare she's been through to do some good for those far more vulnerable than herself.
Our Planet Normal guest this week is Andrew Griffith, Tory MP for Arundel and South Downs and Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade. Griffith is that unusual beast, a frontline politician who actually has some proper business experience. He's been Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer of Sky Television, Chairman of the food company Just Eat, and has held various non-executive directorships, and also served as Director of the Number 10 Policy Unit. An MP since 2019, state-educated Griffith is married with 2 children, a former Treasury Minister, and now in opposition, a staunch supporter of Kemi Badenoch. I started by asking Andrew Griffith for his current thoughts on the UK economy.
Look, you start with the global economy. We know that we're living in volatile times, hot wars, grey conflict, but also trade, and just it's not been a good few years for incumbency. So that's provoked a lot of political turmoil wherever you operate. I mean, when I was in business, I operated across 7 or 8 different markets, and it was surprising how a lot of them shared some of the same challenges. The big pain, here is that this government's come on in, fair dibs, I think we lost rather than they won the election. They certainly made a lot of promises to business, created a real expectation that they would bring not only stability, easy to say, but also they would be a government on the side of business. And then what we've actually seen when you unpick it is a real challenge with the family business death tax. That speaks to a lot of family businesses. That makes up a huge tail in the economy, which goes to their incentives. The national insurance, the jobs tax. Now, look, even if you're ecumenical enough to accept that governments come and go and they'll always choose a slightly different place on the level of public spending, although goodness me, there's a lot of that anyway. To the way that they've raised money, that national insurance jobs tax, it's going like an egg through a snake, hitting all sorts of parts of the economy. Today, we've seen employment has fallen by about 100,000 over the last year, and the largest part of that in the last quarter. So it's having exactly the sort of effect you would expect, which is you put up the cost of labour and you get fewer people employed. And that's the first thing that a lot of business people tell me they've done is they've iced any hiring. They've even pulled back in some areas, and it's hit retail and hospitality particularly. And then the final piece, maybe we'll talk more about it, is the Employment Rights Bill. 300 pages. I mean, it's really quite hard to imagine. 300 pages, 120,000 words of detailed red tape that will scare the willies, frankly, out of anyone who employs people. So as pen sketches go, forgive me, that was a relatively long one. But what you're saying is basically it's not been easy for business for a while. You've got the global macro headwinds that everybody's got to compete with. This government, I regret, has taken some really anti-business measures. We haven't even talked about the high cost of energy. So it's just tough. And it really feels for my former colleagues trying to run big enterprises.
What are your friends in business telling you about the kind of climate out there? It strikes me that hiring has fallen off a cliff, and it wasn't only when that jobs tax you just referred to came in, the big hike in employer national insurance. It's from October, last October's budget, when Rachel Reeves announced that tax was coming in. Yeah,
and actually it was two things. The first thing telling me is it's very tough, right? And they don't feel that this government's got their back. They feel attacked rather than supported by this government. But you're right. The first thing the government did was have a really long hiatus between their first budget. And that of itself created uncertainty. They then started briefing out, trash talking the economy about their inheritance. Actually, look, we all know that the public finances have been difficult for decades. There is a really big job of work to do for the next Conservative government to get those public finances back in good shape. And that will have to involve, sensible decisions about spending as well as where you raise that money from. And that really knocked the stuffing out of business, who I think were actually expecting perhaps, almost more of a Blairite model, the government that genuinely came in and was on the side of business.
And you've been talking a lot and highlighting with some very effective, if I may say so, little social media films, very much modern political campaigning. You've been homing in, Andrew, belying your business background, if I may say so, on the fact that so many relatively wealthy people are leaving the UK. You've got some numbers in there about the amount of tax that the top 1% of earners, the top 5% of earners pay. I think the top 5% of earners, you said, pay 30% of all income tax. And when they leave a huge hole in the budget. And millionaires leaving the UK's shores to go and live elsewhere every 45 minutes, 11,000, I think, in the last financial year.
Look, it pains me greatly because I'm a patriot. I love this country. It's the reason I went into public service to make our country as brilliant as it can be. And we've got so many fabulous natural advantages as to why people would want to come here. When people leave, everybody is poorer. The people who stay behind have to pay either more tax or there's just less money to go around for our public services. So I say in our video, look, you don't make people in Whitechapel or on the Old Kent Road, you don't make their lives better if you go and turn around and attack investors in Mayfair or Park Lane. I've not got a brief for the people that are leaving. My brief is for the UK economy and the people that are staying.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's not in those figures is young people. So they're not millionaires today. They're just trying to climb the ladder of opportunity. They've got smart ideas and they're ambitious. And as many of them are leaving and going to other countries overseas, little bit of movement is not a bad thing, don't get me wrong. But when people feel they're pushed out because of crime, of the cost of living, housing, or just that they're going to face some high marginal tax rates if they succeed, that's something I think should upset everybody.
What do you think the Tories should do? You are obviously Business and Trade Secretary, but you have been Economic Secretary of the Treasury in a Conservative government. You've been Financial Secretary to the Treasury. How can the Conservatives put good ideas out there that try and challenge what Labour is doing? Because I do think, obviously, it's a difficult political climate. We'll come on to that. But I do think a lot of people in the country are looking to the Conservatives to come up with some sensible reforms.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think people actually know that a lot of things that government delivers are not actually working and they could be delivered in a better way. Waste, the way government itself operates.
Do we need a UK DOGE? Do we need to do what the states are doing, what Elon Musk is doing, and really root out government waste in a way that some people could say is brutal?
Yes.
So you think we need our own version of DOGE?
Well, I mean, when people said, this government laughably set up a quango to try and deliver better money for taxpayers. My old-fashioned view is the job of every minister in their department is to deliver value for money and spend money wisely as if it's your own. Now, whether you institutionalise it as DOGE, whether you have a separate unit in the Cabinet Office, I would for sure on day one, have a very ambitious programme of restoring lines of democratic accountability. There's too many federal regulators, for example. That of itself drives risk aversion and slowness. The clock speed of the UK economy is just painful. We all know it takes so long to build infrastructure projects. It takes a long time to get clearance for a business merger. If you're looking in the financial services and you're trying to get regulated for the first time, I want a new generation of entrepreneurs. My political hero is Lord Young. Remember Lord Young of Grafham, Mrs. Thatcher's enterprise minister. It takes so long, Liam, to open a bank account, right? That is a hurdle, and we've done that to ourselves. Always well-intentioned. The law that Parliament passes the most is the law of unintended consequences. And we do need a scythe-like exercise to push back on some of this level of regulation, some of the corpus of law, such as the extensive use of judicial review, which used to be reserved for literally the most egregious examples of state overreach. And now I have parish councils, in my district that talk to me about, we're worried about if we do this, we'll end up in judicial review. So it's become very, very chilling. But you asked about the Conservative Party, as well as a ambitious programme of reform, which is really important to how we deliver. We also want some very clear messages around enterprise. That's the job that Kemi has set me to formulate those, and policies that show we really are on the side of business. I accept that not everybody feels that in our last administration, all of our actions were necessarily consistent. If you're saying you want a war on red tape, don't bring forward, frankly, legislation to set up another football regulator in an industry that, the UK is doing pretty well in.
How bad is this employees' rights bill? Even the OBR, even official estimates are that it's going to pile another $5 billion a year of costs onto employers. Since it was announced, it's yet to be implemented, of course, still going through Parliament. But we've seen hiring plunge. That plus the employer national insurance increase. How damaging is it, and would the Tories reverse it?
Look, in terms of how damaging it is, I think about 2/3 of employers in a poll by business groups are already saying that it's chilling their hiring intentions before it's even come into law. The top 5 business groups have written an open letter saying that this bill goes far too far. It takes us to a position that no government in the last 30 years has tried to do in terms of, back to the 1970s style trade unions.
Unfair dismissal rights from day one of employment.
Unfair dismissal from day one, and an employment tribunal service that, with the best will in the world, is absolutely already failing.
Yeah.
So, if you go to an employment tribunal in some parts of the country, it may take you 2 years to get that case listed. So you've got a broken employment tribunal service, all of these extra duties on employers. To give you another example, there's this thing called the banter ban. It's not about sexual harassment or harassment that's directly aimed at an employee, but what it's about is if an employee overhears 2 punters in a pub or a crowd at a sports venue, that would become a duty of care on the employer. So going way beyond existing legislation. How's an employer reasonably supposed to police that? And we know what happens in these cases. There's massive overreach. We'll either end up with banter bouncers, or lawyers will simply say, look, just don't host a comedy evening. It's just too much of a risk. And so you turn pubs into regulatory safe spaces. That's just one measure in a 300-page bill. I mean, and if the governments say they're obsessed about growth, they love giving a speech about growth or competitiveness, how is our businesses supposed to compete with all of this extra red tape?
You are Business and Trade Secretary, Shadow, of course. What did you make of the UK-US trade deal? Isn't that surely a feather in Keir Starmer's cap?
Look, there's bits of it that are welcome, right? I mean, I met with automotive industry a couple of weeks before this tariff reduction agreement, and for sure, we make some very specialist, very exportable vehicles, and no one wants to be looking down a 25% tariff.
Now it's just a 10% tariff.
Even with 10%, that is still a headwind that our manufacturing businesses don't need. So look, it's a real benefit. I want to be really clear about this for your listeners. It is a benefit that the British Prime Minister, as entirely I think it should be the normal state of the world, is able to conduct trade and tariff policy themselves. Because if we were still within the EU political union, his best locus would be to ask very nicely Ursula von der Leyen if, as part of 28 other countries, the UK's special fact pattern could be represented. Right. So it is good that he's got a tariff reduction. It's absolutely good that the UK is in the room. It's good that most of the India deal removes friction, and we are a trading nation. The last lever that the government could pull on growth is to get more of these trade deals in place. I hope the Gulf deal, which we left in good shape, gets across the line as well. It's one reason why we're so worried about the Surrender Summit that's taking place next week with the EU, whether inadvertently, through naivety, because they're bad negotiators, as we saw over Chagos, or whether it's just a deep-seated Labour will. We do not want to get ourselves back into a position with the European Union that we've impeded our rights to be in the room and to conduct deals around the world.
An irony, of course, that Keir Starmer can only sign these trade deals because we're outside the European Union, and he, of course, has spent much of his political life trying to keep us in the European Union.
I'm waiting for him to talk about this great Brexit benefit.
Do you think former Tory leader Liz Truss, who was Trade Secretary, current Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, who, of course, was Business and Trade Secretary, I know, as do you, that both of those ladies spent a huge amount of time and effort on UK trade deals, both in the US and indeed in India. And indeed, Kemi did sign some trade deals with individual US states, which are not economically insignificant by any means. Are they entitled to feel a bit miffed, Andrew, that these deals have, to coin a phrase, landed in Keir Starmer's lap?
Well, I think we're all a bit more miffed that the government fell into Keir Starmer's lap, to be brutally honest. It was a loveless landslide. And, I think, as I said before, I rather fear we lost that election rather than they won it. Now, therein lies the opportunity. The thing, I have to be positive every day to do this job and work in this postcode. And the positive is that they've turned that share of the vote, whatever it was, about 25% of the vote, into a ceiling, not a floor. They haven't done what other previous Labour governments have done, which is come on in and get even more support or a bounce. They're already the most unpopular government. They've done real damage to the economy, if you believe that, ultimately it's the economy that determines how people vote. They haven't used their, majority, the significant majority. They haven't actually used that for, some of the really difficult reforms that maybe a Conservative government would have found more difficult. They could have really gone hard on reforming the NHS to give us a better, more productive healthcare system. In fact, NHS productivity continues to decline. They could have gone for a really big building programme in our most urban areas. Instead, they've reduced the target, the housing target, for the Mayor of London. So, there's always, any government's got a lot of grand challenges in its in tray. Actually, they've rather squandered those already. They've become very unpopular. And therein lies my optimistic view about what is the way back for the Conservatives. It is about having competency on the economy, on business and trade. I do think we can own that. The backgrounds of many people within the Conservative Party speak directly to those issues, and we can re-earn people's trust. And then we've got to rebuild the machine and communicate, as I try to do a little bit and others do better than me, but communicate in different ways to broaden out the scope of people we're talking to.
I think when the numbers were shaken out, Andrew, Keir Starmer's party got 20% of the vote because they got 33% of a 60% turnout. So 4 in 5 UK adults of voting age didn't vote for Labour. So very much a loveless landslide, as you said. And when it comes to the Tories getting back, a lot of Planet Normal listeners, there may be some natural Conservatives in our listenership. Many of them have gone to reform, I think it's fair to say. How do you beat reform in the broadest possible sense? What direction do you need to go in terms of your brief and beyond? Because this is obviously a challenge. Some would say an existential challenge for what we used to call in this country the Tories, the natural party of government.
Look, again, to start with the positive, I firmly believe that the UK has a centre-right majority. I think more people understand the facts of life. They are Conservative. They understand their own kitchen table economics, and writ large, those are the principles by which we need to run the government. In only 5, I think, out of the whole of my life, so 5 years out of my life, has the government actually raised as much in tax as it's spent. Every other year, it's borrowed more for spending. So I think people understand that. I understand completely that they are cross and frustrated with the last Conservative government. We managed to alienate and let down people from all sorts of walks of life and wings of the party. And there is quite a process to rebuild. There's an organisational piece, and you've got to control what you can control. So we in the Conservative Party have got a lot of work to do. We've got to find new candidates. We've got to rewire ourselves, and we've got to come up with a set of policies. The one thing we don't have to do is come up with a new set of principles. I mean, I joined the Conservative Party age 14 under Mrs. Thatcher. The principles that would have stood us well in those days would be the same principles today.
Do you go after reform, Andrew, or do you try and, out-Lib Dem the Lib Dems?
Look, you'll think this is slightly trite, but it's profound on a different level. When I was in business, we said there are customers. This was at Sky. So we said there are Sky customers and there are potential Sky customers. And we didn't start putting them in boxes or slicing down our potential headroom. We saw everybody as potentially having a need and a desire for our product. And then we got on with the job of trying to make sure it was the best product, reliable, competitively priced, and superior to the competition. So I've said this a little bit trite. I'm not trying to dodge your question. in different parts of the country, you've got to appeal back to people who might have gone to different parties at the moment. But the country will.
But as Mrs. Thatcher said, if you stand in the middle of the road, you get run over.
Oh, look, I don't think that's about.
Isn't this the danger, Andrew, that the Tories are trying to be in the middle of the road when really they need to be true to their centre-right roots?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything about that that's about the middle of the road. It's about having good common sense conservative policies, which I think will appeal to lots of people. Now, you'll know cleverer polling than me says we lost voters who were both simultaneously concerned about immigration and went to the Lib Dems. That's not the point. The point is, if you put forward a set of clear, alluring, credible policies and the detail of the plans behind them, right? I don't think people are going to give us a blank check. I don't think the next election is going to be a trust me election. It's going to be a show me election, which is why, when people say, look, we're going to take a little bit of time, it's not true that we don't have any policies today. We will reverse the attack on independent school education. We will reverse the family business death tax. Those are two really clear policies, and not everyone even knows about those. But it's when people say, look, you just got to take a bit of time. I agree with that up to a point. You do need to just be credible, and you can't just bang out another slogan when, sadly, our performance in office, didn't always follow through on the slogan. Sometimes it did, but not always.
Andrew Griffith, great to have you with us once again on Planet Normal. Well, there you go, Allison. There are signs of life on the Tory front bench. Andrew Griffith is a smart guy, in my view. He's got a lot of credibility across Britain's business community. And I personally wish we saw a lot more of him on our airwaves, because I think he's got a lot of sensible things to say.
I really like him, Liam. I mean, he's just a good egg, isn't he? And you just think he's talking such great good sense at a time when businesses are being shafted by this government. I mean, something that Kemi Badenoch raised in the Commons, we all know we can just walk down our high streets and see what these national insurance employers' contributions and rates and so on are doing. And Kemi raised the fact that Beales, a department store in Basingstoke, is having a Rachel Reeves closing down sale, and Beales had survived 2 world wars. Hitler couldn't close them, but Rachel Reeves's ridiculous budget could. I really enjoyed that interview. I thought he said a lot. Very interesting. He was talking about us needing a sort of DOGE type operation, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was a good line. I think the Tories need to pursue that line. I think it's difficult for the Tories in terms of these 2 trade deals that we've seen signed by Kier Starmer. I mean, I know for a fact that current Tory leader, when she was Business and Trade Secretary, she put a huge amount of effort into negotiating with India. And I know she feels that Starmer has made too many concessions to India, concessions that she refused to make. So then he's got the glory of the trade deal. I would say, as I wrote in my Sunday Telegraph column last Sunday, link in the show notes to this episode, that for all the razzmatazz of the UK-US trade deal and the special relationship and signing it on the 80th anniversary of VE Day, that wasn't really a trade deal. That was an agreement to put a moratorium on tariffs. It didn't affect the service sector, which is the biggest part of our economy, the biggest part of our exports at all. There were lots of vague promises about what might happen in the future. In contrast, the trade deal with India is a very significant trade deal, I would say. India is now the world's most populous country. It's taken over China. It's going to be probably the fastest growing big economy in the world over the next few years. Only 2% of our trade is with India, 20% is with America. So there's huge scope to grow our trade with India. And while, of course, we talk about the special relationship with America, which we obviously have, we also have an incredible relationship with India. Think of the cultural links. Think of the knowledge of and affinity with India among our own population here in the UK. Think of all the Brits who have grown up here of Indian parentage or grandparentage who speak those local languages in India naturally, and so can then really engage with business communities in India. I'm actually, for all the headlines about the national insurance issues and so on, which again I covered in my column, I actually think this Indian trade deal is far more important for the future of the British economy than the US trade deal for all the Trump razzmatazz.
Well, hats off to you, co-pilot, on our 250th edition of Planet Normal, that you absolutely got right that Trump would sign a trade deal with the UK. Not the first and not the last time that our resident second most impressive economist has put his finger on the developing trends.
I'll have you for that, Pearson. I'll have you. Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal.
Huge amount of reaction, obviously, to the story of the 6 Kent police visiting Julian Fuchs. Sean says, "Dear Space Cadets, given the coverage of the recent arrest of the ex-policeman in Kent, I am concerned that my deviancy may result in the thought police knocking down my door and locking me up too. I have purchased the Telegraph, subscribed to it, and the Mail online." Oh, Sean, you're for it, mate.
An outrage.
"I have listened to podcasts and watched YouTubes from the likes of Trigonometry, Dan Wootton, Talk, Jordan Peterson, and Peter Hitchens. I am doomed. But most of all," says Sean, "I am concerned about my subscription to Planet Normal and that I have received a personal email from the revolutionary figure Allison Pearson. Oh no, the gulag awaits." It certainly does, Sean. Don't be messing with us far-right riffraff, love.
This is Ben. As for legal migration stabilising at 200,000 to 300,000 per annum, the compound effect will be utterly ruinous in just a few years. We're already overwhelmed, says Ben. Any more and we're sunk. Nothing less than a drastic cut in absolute terms can save us. We're at an existential moment and everyone knows it. Mort says, Kier Starmer, the barrister who, in receipt of taxpayers' money, brackets legal aid, successfully sued the British government circa 2003 and forced them to pay full benefits to all immigrants while their cases were adjudicated. That's why they all head for Britain. But don't remind Kier Starmer of this. He doesn't like it to be widely known. And Tim responds to Mort, barristers don't necessarily agree with the claims that their clients and those solicitors who engage them bring. Have you not heard of the cab rank rule? You're on stronger ground having a go at the globalists who sit in the offices of the FT and the Economist, tirelessly arguing for the removal of national borders and constantly ranting about nativists and xenophobes, etc. The RNLI Board of Trustees, says Tim, is also guilty of suborning the widely admired volunteer crews of the Dover and Dungeness lifeboats. They're a disgrace to the memory of Grace Darling and her father. Britain's cursed with homegrown idiots who appear determined to bring about the collapse of a proud nation that has successfully resisted invasion for nearly 1,000 years. We're getting close to Gibbon's fall of a once great civilization.
And Nigel says, the numbskull policewoman who searched Mr. Fuchs's home should be named and shamed. However, she has coined a very useful new term, Brexity, as in Brexity things she found on Julian's bookshelves. The word means, says Nigel, referring to a democratic vote to the British people to leave the European community, a vote disliked by very thick police officers who mistakenly think they're running a police state. Very good definition, Nigel.
And finally, Allison, he struck again, Bob the Bard. Dear Planet Normal, he says, when I heard about Julian Fuchs being punished by the police for his choice of books, I panicked and decided that my own shelves needed to be quickly purged of troublesome titles. To lighten the mood, I've composed a little ditty to sing while I'm burning my Brexity things. Thanks again to Planet Normal and my sincerest apologies to Rogers and Hammerstein. And here we go, to be sung to the tune of These Are a Few of My Favourite Things, My Brexity Things by Bob the Bard. I'm burning some books from my shelves in a hurry, by dodgy dissidents like Douglas Murray. Books that lampoon our demented left wing. These are a few of my Brexity things. This one's Clean Brexit by someone we know. A dangerous tome, on the fire it must go. Shriver and Hitchens and Liddell and Stein. These are a few of the favourites of mine. Here is another, it's by Helen Joyce. Will they arrest me for making this choice? Net zero skeptics and critics of woke burn all the books till they're ashes and smoke. When the cops knock and they search me, I may well feel sad, but I will have burned all my Brexity things, and so it won't seem so bad. Hooray for Bob! Hooray for Planet Normal! And on that bombshell, Allison, that Bob the Bard bombshell, unsurpassed Planet Normal poet. That's it from Planet Normal for another week. So we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views. Email of the week, it's my turn. Bob, we've got to give you another mug. You're going to have to build an extension in your house. Send us an email to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Put mug winner in the subject heading because that deserves a Planet Normal mug.
Absolutely brilliant. I think Bob's finest yet. And before we go, I should say that co-pilot Halligan is pulling a fast one in the weight loss, Planet Normal weight loss competition. Because some of us are just trying to do our 10,000 steps. But Halligan is this weekend cycling to Paris. I mean, honestly.
In 24 hours.
24 hours.
I've got to average 13 miles an hour if you include the time from the ferry from New Haven to Dieppe.
Pump those knees. And it is for an excellent cause, which is the Duchenne Dash. Do you want to just say quickly about it, Liam?
Duchenne Dash is the flagship event. We run it each year. It's not just me. 150 of us are cycling to Paris in 24 hours. And we are raising money to fund clinical trials for treatments into Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's a particularly nasty form of fatal muscular dystrophy that affects young people. I've actually cycled the Duchenne Dash 13 times in a row now, though we did take a year off for COVID. It's a wonderful cause, and if you do want to chuck in a few quid, I would be really grateful if I could be so cheeky to ask on Planet Normal. The link to my Just Giving page is in the show notes to this episode. And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal and the madness of Planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our producers, Cass Ho, Louisa Wells. Allison, I just want to say thank you so much to you for all the effort you've put into Planet Normal over the last 250 episodes. It hasn't always been easy, but we've always kept it fun, and the podcast means a great deal to me, and I know it does to many of our listeners too. So stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.